The Ancient Gods Part 2 is presumably the final major expansion for the base title of Doom Eternal. Released in March of 2021, Part 2 sees the Doomslayer confront the Dark Lord in an effort to finally end his campaign against Hell. Part 2 is another 3 levels and a final boss fight that end the Doomslayer's current saga. For the Ancient Gods Part 2, I beat most of it on Nightmare. As I stated in my review of Part 1, I received Part 2 as part of Doom Eternal's Deluxe Edition when it was on sale. As this is presumably the last piece of campaign DLC for Eternal, I'm going to spoil quite a bit here. If you'd rather experience the narrative for yourself, I'd skip this video. If you don't mind the spoiler, I'd love for you to stick around. If you're still here, you probably know that Eternal continues with the Doomslayer having betrayed Samudra and the Father by destroying the Father's life orb instead of restoring him to physical form. The Slayer decides to restore the Dark Lord to physical form instead, as killing him will result in the destruction of all of the demons of Hell. In the World Spear and Earth Reclaimed, the Slayer must activate a beacon, collect a crystal, and then activate a teleporter in order to enter Imora, the most protected and most advanced part of Hell. In Imora, the Sentinel Legions rally to the Slayer's call and provide the cover of an invasion in order to allow the Slayer to find and kill the legendary Dark Lord. And that's it. The premise is pretty cool, but it does adhere a bit too closely to in-game for my liking. After all, without the decade plus of build-up that the MCU invested in, it kind of falls flat here, especially considering the Sentinel's inclusion had literally nothing to the game besides aesthetic. I guess I was hoping for either the Slayer to personally lead groups of Sentinels into battle, or for the Sentinels to lead the charge and help him through, but neither of those really happened. That's more of a subjective criticism, but I think it remains relevant when considering the climactic build-up the trailer presented us with. As for the story itself, there are a couple of last-minute twists that I thought were rather dumb. Basically, instead of the Father, it turns out that Devoth is the true creator. He was betrayed and dethroned by his creation, enraging him and resulting in him vowing to take his vengeance out on the Makers, the Father, and from there, subjugating the rest of creation.
For too long have I been imprisoned by my own creations. You will not stop my vengeance, nor the one who betrayed me. Tell him.
He is the first being, and my creator. When he fell, I ascended.
They lied to you, Slayer. Imora and its people would have been perfect, if not for the treachery of my servants. They sealed me away, stole my power and name. And now, the time has come for a reckoning. As all things were made by my hand, so shall they be unmade. Starting with you.
Okay, fine, but that cheapened a lot of Eternal's and 2016's writing. The ending itself is also anticlimactic. The Slayer is laid to rest in another sarcophagus.
By his hand, all things were made. Even you.
In all honesty, I feel that this was a pretty poor ending for this particular story. It feels like this ending was kind of slapped together via committee rather than planned out far in advance, and I really wish id Software had spent more time on the plotting and writing of the narrative. As expected for this expansion, Part 2 does not at all disappoint when it comes to art direction. The World Spear's Argent de Noir features 2 parts. The first is a picturesque landscape and castle that actually reminded me of Overwatch's Eichenwald quite a lot. The second is a more frigid mountainous area on the way to the World Spear. Earth Reclaimed shows a planet slowly being reclaimed by nature, and Amora features a kind of recolored and reimagined version of Urdak. They all look and sound fantastic. As far as the soundtrack, I just didn't notice it as much here outside of the final boss fight. Simply because there's a bit more downtime there than in other parts of the DLC. It's fine, but I wouldn't recommend you buy this DLC based on that alone. As far as mechanics and fairness, I think that Part 2 is a much more enjoyable experience than Part 1, with a couple of exceptions. Unlike Part 1's increased difficulty with no added tools with which to combat them, Part 2 provides an increased challenge compared to the base game, but with a new addition in the form of the Betrayer villain's Sentinel Hammer. Dropping this in an encounter crushes weaker enemies while stunning larger ones and provides for increased ammo drops. Think of it as a kind of AoE chainsaw bomb with a short stun. The World Spear opens on an uncharacteristically scenic Argent de Noir, and for whatever reason, it felt more like a carnival of fun kills rather than a battle against the forces of hell. There's an addition to this DLC of meat hook grapple points, making it even more like Link's hook shot, so that you can traverse these levels with more than just the dash and double jump. Like Part 1, this DLC introduces several new enemies. The first is the new Screecher zombies, which I think are one of the more interesting additions because if killed, they substantially buff any allies within a certain range. Because of this, these foes are almost always better left alone and alive for the duration of a fight. Next is the Stone Imp, a more melee-focused imp that requires either the hammer or the combat shotgun's auto-fire to destroy. These were pretty fun, and I honestly think these were included to give that shotgun more to do, which was a welcome change of pace. The Armored Baron is a new variant of the Barons of Hell that requires a weak point to be destroyed before it can be damaged, which I think actually makes these foes easier in some ways, as destroying that point also stuns them for a short time. In addition to this, almost every time you see these Armored Barons, they're alone, making them pretty easy to kill. There are new demonic troopers added to Amora, but these are barely worth mentioning from a gameplay perspective. Their armor designs are derived from Doom 2016's multiplayer skins, and they die in 1 or 2 shots and provide a bit of ammo. These are joined by Riot soldiers, new foes equipped with impenetrable gold plasma shields rather than the base game's blue ones. These are required to be engaged from behind or from the side and do present much more of a challenge. The most pervasive and arguably most dangerous of the new lineup are Cursed Prowlers. Unlike the base game's Violet Prowlers, these are green. They're not common, but when they do pop in, they should always be panic-inducing and your first priority. This is because when they melee you, they apply a DOT Cursed status effect that disables dashes and jumps for the player. To further complicate engaging them, they require a blood punch fatality in order to lift that curse. While most of the new demons felt pretty natural in terms of progression, the Cursed Prowler felt overly punishing and the most not Doom of the group. Having said that, a hammer or a burst of rockets will kill them pretty easily, so again, these new mechanics are fairly balanced with the tools at your disposal. I mentioned in my last review that I thought the Spirit shouldn't come back in any significant capacity and should be added to encounters in a more considered fashion. I was really glad to see that id Software did that here. When a Spirit does pop up, it's usually in a way that complements the encounter and serves as a challenging problem to solve, rather than an insurmountable and frustrating task to bash your head on. For the purposes of this review, I feel like I have to talk about the final boss battle, a level all on its own. To be frank, I kind of hated it. While the Dark Lord's armor looks awesome, the fight itself is just tedious and annoying. It's a lot like a Marauder fight, but with more phases, and if the Marauder healed itself and summoned a ton of other demons. The basic gist is that you have to evade incoming turret fire, evade grenades fired from his equipment launcher, evade a sword swipe, or evade a well-telegraphed shield bash, the last two which also take your health and replenish his. All of this is once again reminding me of Overwatch, in this case Reinhardt. Assuming you can accomplish this, you use those green eye flashes to strike back and then use the hammer to extend the stun duration, thereby opening up to more damage. And that's it, for the entire fight. As for those 5 phases I mentioned, those basically serve to escalate the frequency of attacks the Dark Lord throws at you. Mechanically, this is good, as it lets you get acclimated to the intended difficulty increase, but in practice, it's just too long and drawn out for what you get in return, that 30 or so second ending that just lays you aside. At the time of this review in late March of 2021, The Ancient Gods Part 2 sits at $20 American on Steam. It's also coupled with the first expansion for $30 American. Otherwise, it's available in the Doom Eternal Deluxe Edition for a total of $90 American. There are once again no microtransaction within this DLC. It's also standalone from the base game and the first DLC, meaning if you just like to play this and not the other entries, have at it. This DLC was, from a gameplay perspective, really awesome. It didn't reach the heights of the base game, but I think it did exceed the experience of Part 1. It's understandable that id Software would run up against some limitations in creating realistically achievable encounters with the variety of demons they've created, but I think they've done well with that in what they've presented here. There are some new additions with it, which I think do well to add to the complexity of the bestiary, and I hope to see some of them continue into the future. If you enjoyed the gameplay of the base game and or Part 1, I highly recommend picking this up. On the other hand, from a narrative perspective, I think The Ancient Gods Part 2 shit the bed. In just seconds, it does a lot to undermine and obfuscate what was presented in both Doom 2016 and Eternal. If you want to do and see everything that id Software has created here and would like to see the final confrontation with the Dark Lord, get this. However, if you want the eternal beast that is the Doomslayer and don't want that cheapened, just stick with the base game and enjoy that final cutscene. Until the next entry, I hope your doom is eternal.
And you will be their savior. Your strength